Cool. Hi, everyone. I'm here with arguably the most powerful Tai Chi person I know in the world today, Adam Meisner, my dear friend. And yeah, we're going to talk about some controversial shit and hope you enjoy. Okay, where do you want to start?
You lead the way, my friend.
Shall we talk about Trump derangement syndrome? I'm just kidding. We'll do it another time. So I had a couple of questions for you, and well, the first question I had was that obviously you haven't trained in about a year or so, something like that. And what I noticed was that this time you were a lot more powerful than even when I met you before.
Okay.
And we trained together. So can you talk a little bit about the power development in Tai Chi and your approach towards it?
Well, this year I haven't done too much power development in Tai Chi. I've been mainly sitting.
Right.
So sometimes it comes from another source.
Mm-hmm.
But generally, if I had to describe the power formula, it's something like, not talking even about Chi right now, which of course is primary.
Yep.
How much white tissue can you engage whilst being completely so sung that you're transparent? And usually when people train, if they engage more white tissue, they lose transparency, or if they become really sung and become transparent, they lose the engagement.
Right.
So the marriage of those two and the most of both coming together gives you the most power.
Yeah, like when I touched hands with you, there was definitely one Chi throughout. There was no real lines or breakages or anything like that. It was quite lovely to see, actually.
Everywhere. That's the
And
idea.
it becomes very, very difficult to deal with and neutralize when your power comes, because it's not a particular given line, or it's not coming through a particular mechanism.
No specific angles or anything like that.
Nothing like that.
Cool.
So, so there you go, folks. You heard it here. It's not about the kettlebell hip thrusting and butt clenching.
That's all good for people that want to do that, whatever. But, you know,
But I mean, did you ever even do that nonsense anyway? Like, apparently, some people seem to think that that is a precursor or jibengong for Tai Chi power development, which I find retarded. But
I've never swung a kettlebell.
There you go. And so, yeah, there you have it about Tai Chi power development. And the other question I had was also about the fast frame.
Right.
I know that you've been doing a lot of fast frame in your personal practice.
Yeah.
And so can you talk a little bit more about the uniqueness of the fast frame? It's not just any other frame done fast.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think every frame is unique. Yeah, not just the fast frame, the various slow frames. I think every frame that you have in a given system has a different function. And if they don't have a different function, then what's the point? Just
Exactly right. Why do you do it?
Or like, oh, your arms are more extended or less extended. It's crazy, right? So I think each frame has a unique body method, a unique engine, basically. And in my system, each one builds upon the one before it. So what I mean by that is you don't throw away what you developed in the previous one.
Once you embodied it.
Yeah, you just forget it.
Yeah.
But it's still there. It's embodied. That's what Kung Fu is.
Exactly right.
You embody something. So, yeah, the first frame develops a specific engine and an amount of the white tissue that gets engaged in a certain way. Then the second frame develops a specific engine and more white tissue that gets developed, engaged in a specific way on top of the previous, and so on, like that. And so you learn to develop more complete power with less holes, right? Like you say. And then a fast frame can be trained at different stages depending on what slow frame you're doing.
Right.
So let's say there's at level A you're doing big frame, and level B you're doing small frame, but you can practice the fast frame at either level. And it will express and manifest differently because it's usage frame.
Yep.
So you're using the Neigong, the Neijin that you've developed through your slow frame.
So is it actually possible to create the shapes of the fast frame using the large frame technology, for example?
I would say yes and no.
Okay. So it'll be an approximation, I suppose, because...
I mean, you can counterfeit things.
Yeah.
You can always reverse engineer things, but it's not right. So it's a paradox like everything in Tai Chi. The fast frame will be different dependent on your
internal engine,
enable.
right?
Yeah. But there's also the nature of the fast frame, which is specific, which will dictate the shape, the flow, the rhythm, and all these things, which are different,
Right.
totally different to the slow frame,
Right.
because they're different purpose. One is to build, one is to use. So, what's really efficient for building is not really efficient for using.
That's right.
What's efficient for using is not efficient for building.
And this is the reason why we have slow frames for cultivation of the different engines and different frames, and then we have the usage frame,
Exactly,
right?
yeah.
So,
It doesn't mean application frame.
yep.
Yeah, it might have things that you could use in application, but no form is application.
Exactly, right.
application.
I mean, you can always contrive a situation to fit
Yeah.
the form shape, but that's not where it's at.
No,
that
it's
actually
more
is.
about the agility, the speed, the angle changes,
Yep.
the different
And the movement,
winds,
you
all
know.
of it. Yeah. The head movement.
Head movement, yeah.
Yeah.
So that was kind of what I was going to get to as well, was that when you do the fast frame, there's a lot of intricate circles or circulations, or whichever you want to call it. Like, it's not as straightforward as a large frame at all.
Not at all.
But
Not at
the
all.
power from the large frame, you can still feel it. Like, you can feel the power from there, but all the circulations are very chaotic. It's very hard to follow.
Right. Well, in my system, we have a progression through the different engines. The first is like pulling silk, the vertical stretching and waves through the silk body from the foot to the hand, something like
That'd
that.
be like that level.
Earth.
Yeah.
From the foot, from the earth.
And you're using the Huang Xian form for that, isn't
That's
you?
right. Yeah. And then we have the Lawson engine, the screw engine, which is more Dantian-driven spiraling force, which we do in the big frame. And then we have the chaotic circles
Yep.
in the small frame.
Yep.
And then, so depending on which you've embodied the most, it will come out different. So when I teach, say, Gabriel,
Yep.
who works mainly on the large frame,
Yep.
his fast frame will look different to mine.
Yep.
Because mine has more chaotic circles from the small frame.
Yours, like just watching your fast frame alone is dizzying.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot going on.
There's a lot going on.
One of the reasons why you have the progressive forms is to have more complicated movement, because you engage more tissue, more
Yep.
gears, so to speak, more power, and
Yep.
also much harder to neutralize because the force is more chaotic.
That's right, and it's very hard to follow, right? And there's so many yin-yang differentials everywhere. So,
You got it.
so cool. So what's your plan for the fast frame? I know that Shifu Huang.
He wants me to teach it more, but I will. But keep training for now.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I'm not satisfied with my skill at it, basically.
Fair enough.
To be honest, like I can do parts of it well,
Yep.
but yeah, to really have it, I don't think you should learn something and teach it, or even after a number of years. You really have to embody something really well. If you don't have the kung fu truly, then don't teach it. And then I have to think about how to teach it, because what my body does is different to what the students do, and so on.
And the million-dollar question is, does it work in the octagon?
I think I'd get tired just walking up to that.
you and me both. Congratulations on becoming Huang Shifu's disciple.
Thank you.
And it sounds like Huang Shifu is counting on you to spread his art all over the world.
Yeah, well, apparently he hadn't taught that frame before, so he wants me to teach it some. I mean, I'll teach it to people that are ready,
Yeah,
I'm not-
I mean, that's the thing, right? Like, you have to be ready.
Yeah.
And that segues nicely into my next question, like, what is ready? Like, I mean, because the thing is, like, there's so many people in the world doing Tai Chi, but so few with authentic skills. Like, what the hell is going on?
I mean, it's not easy.
Is it the work? Is it the mental attitude? Is it that their training is somehow lopsided and missing components?
I think it's lack of information and lack of sincerity. Yeah.
And how do you see lack of sincerity playing out? I mean, I do agree with you, 100%.
Yeah, I think it's something like naked honesty with oneself, to actually do the process no matter what, not to try to get a certain result at the cost of the process. Yeah.
And the other thing is also, like, people, I mean, this is not just a problem with Westerners, but it's a problem even in China, I've seen. I jokingly say that everybody changes their form sooner or later. Everybody changes their method sooner or later to suit their level of incompetence.
Sure.
So I think part of the problem is also that I've seen a lot of these people, after some years of practice, when they start getting some results, at some point they draw the line in the sand and they just basically make that the be-all and end-all.
My first observation in the early years of really absorbing into the Tai Chi scene a little bit was that people that had something, who at that stage I thought were pretty good, they have a very small segment of the pie, and then they get pretty good at it because they attach to it and they do that for decades. But it's just a small segment of the pie, and you don't get the art properly with such a narrow segment of the pie. So part of the sincerity is to keep learning and keep training and evolve and let things grow and not get totally obsessed with one little thing just because it works a bit.
Yeah.
The near enemy is that which works.
Yeah. So I kind of have some interesting experiences from both ends of the spectrum. So a couple of my favorite teachers, obviously they were like, one of them is still alive, and it's quite inspirational to see that every time I see him, he's getting better, he's refining his art. And when you ask him about the art, he says, it is me, I'm embodying it, right?
Yeah, but that comes late, right?
Yeah.
I totally believe that. I mean, I tell people I'm not teaching you some lineage, I'm teaching you my Kung Fu.
Yeah.
Right? That's it. That's all I can show you.
And
but students don't need their own Kung Fu for a long time.
Yep.
It's post-embodiment, right?
Yeah.
After it's embodied, then it goes and connects to your inner being, and
That's
then
right.
true art comes out, right?
And especially being an internal art, once it is embodied, it expresses in a unique way that you're put together, or your mind is put together, that kind of thing, right?
Well, that's the art phase of it, but it's quite late. And most people either do it too early or never do it, and it's it's not easy to get it right, those things.
That's the thing. So, so in that sense, how would you say that someone should kind of assess where they're at? When would they be ready to
let it take its own shape a bit?
Yeah.
When you can do everything your teacher can, at least, I would say.
At the very least, right?
Yeah, I mean, very well, and then you need a teacher with more. I mean, it depends on who your teacher is.
Yeah.
Basically.
And I mean, So, I mean, unfortunately, some people either completely regimentally try to mimic their teacher to the most minute detail. And some people already start correcting their teacher without embodying what their teacher saying at all. Start optimizing, start improving, right?
Yeah, well, you're better off to copy the teacher to every minute.
Yeah, that's right.
At least for...
At the very least, you have the right scaffolding, right?
Yeah.
It's
you have to get their Kung Fu before you can have your Kung Fu. You need Kung Fu, and Kung Fu is transmitted. You get the Kung Fu of your teacher, unless you're like some kind of super gifted person or whatever, and then it will unfold naturally. I mean, you could also say you don't decide.
Right.
You don't decide to make it your own.
Yep.
If you're making a decision, that's wrong.
Well, that's wrong, because how can you decide, right?
Yeah. It just
happens.
It's maturity.
Yeah. Cool. So in your own training these days, what do you normally do?
I mainly sit, but when I'm not sitting, for Tai Chi stuff, I do what I teach. I do opening the body, I do filling with Qi, I do mobilizing Qi through the various methods.
Right, because people seem to think that these are the things that you only do in the beginning and then you don't do it later on. That's not correct, is it?
No, I think that's all there is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what that means might evolve.
Yep.
But it's always that. You can never be open enough.
Yeah.
And life is a closing experience.
That's right.
And, you can never mobilize well enough.
Yep.
You can never build enough.
Yep. And so, in terms of the evolution, what do you think about people's perception of Sung? Because, I mean, in one sense you can say the entire art is about Sung, or Sung and Ting, maybe.
I think it's true from one point of view.
Yeah. So, how do you basically explain to people the evolution of Sung itself?
Well, the first thing I want them to understand is that it's a process, not a state. You're doing it.
Yep.
You're sung-ing. And that it is the primary engine. No matter what shape and form the engine has, it's driven via sung. So that's the most important foundation. That you're not in a relaxed state and then you drive via contraction. The actual release makes the mobilization and change. That's most
assuming that you have embodied the engineering principles and you're full.
Well, it's sort of the process over time, right? But that's the fundamental thing. And then, I guess you could say something like there's different confirmatory signs of deeper sung. more deep song will create different energies and shapes and body organizations, and you release more and it changes and changes and changes.
And the body opens massively, right? Like
Definitely.
it
Well,
opens
the first
more and
level
more and
of
more.
song is open, right?
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean it stops.
That's right.
It's cyclic,
It's so in terms of accessing the authentic skills of Tai Chi, what do you think is the role of things like sitting and Chi development?
Well, I can't speak for anyone else's experience, but I've always done sitting before Tai Chi, really.
That's probably why you're so good at it.
I think it helps.
Yep.
You need to... Okay, so if you want to build Chi, you have to access Chi. If you have to access Chi, you have to have profound attention, saturated into the body. And I think it's hard to get if you're not a meditator. Maybe if you have a very meditative mind, you don't need to do seated meditation.
Yep.
But then you're already doing it, aren't you? So
Either that, or you've got a very obsessive mind where you want
that also works.
You apply yourself under pressure and you keep trying to figure out how to make things work.
Well, if you're constantly in.
Yeah, exactly.
So being inside is paying attention inside the body.
Yep.
So if you're inside all the time, in a global sense, in your whole body, not in a little bit, then you can access Chi, hopefully.
Yep.
And then to build it, well, you have to spend a lot of time in there, and then you need to pressurize those conditions, and you need to be out of the fight or flight state, and so on and so on and so on.
So there's this school of thought in Tai Chi that my view is that it is misinterpreted from the teachings of the past masters. They think that you had to do things outside your body.
You mean like the ease outside and all that kind of stuff? Or?
Like the ease outside the body, you're like basically creating all these imaginary things outside your body.
Yeah. I mean, if you're imagining, you're already outside. And I don't buy into the ease outside of the body. You should be saturated inside. You can have awareness, obviously, through the eye gate, for example, outside of the body, because you're not asleep and your eyes aren't closed. But your attention is saturated within always. Otherwise, you don't build or access Chi, and you can't do internal processes.
Well, this is the thing, right? Like, so when it comes to, say, physical sensations or physical assessment of other people's bodies, other people's intention, whatever that
Well, that
may be.
happens inside you.
All that happens inside you, right? Like we don't have the sensory capacity to directly perceive it.
No, it's your nervous system.
Yeah, that's right. What we are perceiving is
sight, so it's sound, everything.
Everything is the inner changes perceived by the nervous system, and then we build a model and we speculate based on that model, right?
So, seeing as that's the reality, you could argue that then it doesn't matter if you think you're doing it outside, but it does. It's one of the mysteries of life.
That's right.
It's like you have to align with that reality or something, and then you can build.
But this is an interesting thing because, I mean, I come from a tradition that, like mobilize tradition, right? It basically uses perceptual models in a very big way to have physical effect. But the thing is that it's very, like, what I find really interesting is that there's no confusion over whether about the perceptual model and reality. The perceptual model is not accepted as reality. So the perceptual model is designed to guide certain outcomes in the body that you must recognize, and then you should discard the perceptual model. So it's really interesting because some of the traditions that I see, especially online, they end up believing that the mental models that they use, the perceptual model they use, is the fabric of reality. And they have no sensation whatsoever of the actual physical things that are happening in them that is due to structuring the experience a certain way.
Right.
So in my view, that's a complete error.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's by definition an error because it's a misunderstanding of reality.
Yeah.
I don't think my system uses perceptual models as much, but we tend to. It's more about saturating inside, and then sort of micro adjustments of song and this kind of thing to get a similar result.
Yeah, it's so. It's really interesting to see how many of these traditions that are out there that basically have all these perceptual models, but they're just their imagination. They're not even structuring their inner experience to have physical effect. So at the end of the day, right, however you structure your experience, however you choose to perceive your experience, if there's no physical result, it's just in your mind, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's imaginary.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if there's no physical result, then it is just in your head, right?
If you know, as I always say, if you want imaginary results, practice imagination.
That's right.
So, you know, I will often say something to hint.
Yep.
You know, look, it's as if there's, sometimes I say there's like a monster standing behind you holding your skull and you sink down.
As if is a key point here.
But then I found out years later, that somebody I taught, and years later they've been visualizing that. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is an example of the way people deviate.
This is the downfall of it because, I mean, you know, I'm going to get a lot of hate for this, but at the end of the day, I think a lot of people in the Indian arts want to feel special. And whenever there are things that are offered to them that, oh, this is something special the normies can't feel, this is a hidden aspect of reality.
That's why people get sold on all this crazy esoteric sort of stuff, like, you know, like some kind of they're doing magic all the time and they can do anything they want just with their will or imagination, which of course you can't.
Of course you can't.
Well, you can in the imaginary sphere. I imagine that I'm, you know, bringing this energy in or expressing this. It's like, well, if you're using your thought, you're already in delusion.
Yeah. But that's manifesting abundance, right?
It's the secret.
Exactly right. Yeah, actually, speaking of which, without naming names, one of the particularly sort of delusion-prone, I would say, traditions that I know of, one of the gentlemen who practiced that, they were actually talking about how Tai Chi doesn't work unless someone is actually trying to get them. So
you mean like using force on you?
So
what do you mean by trying to get them?
Let me try to phrase this correctly. So what they were saying was that if the other person doesn't give you enough pressure, Tai Chi doesn't work.
I don't believe that, but maybe at a really beginner level it's a bit like that or something, but no.
Yeah, I mean, at a beginner level I fully understand that, right? But at the end of the day, my experience is that depending on how strong you are, the other person, even if they think that they're not giving anything, they're giving a lot.
It's like a relativity thing, dare I say. Like you have to be strong compared to the other person.
Yep.
You don't have to be strong, you have to be strong compared to the other person.
Yeah.
And if you have a big gap, that's when all the magic happens.
Exactly.
If you have less of a gap, it's less magic. But then you also just have the actual power.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's the thing, right?
Like the power of your own body.
Yeah.
The inner body, not just borrowing power, not just hua. All those things are real, but there's also just juice.
Yeah, that's it.
And some people think Tai Chi is all borrowing, it's all that, but that's not true. Yes, that's tactically how it functions and a huge part of the art, but you also develop Gong, right?
That's right. I mean, that's actually hitting the nail right on the head, because their view is that if the other person is not giving me power to borrow, I can't make Tai Chi work. Yeah. And that's completely untrue.
If you only have borrowing Jin, that might be true, but borrowing
I mean, that's
one
little part of Tai Chi repertoire of the Jins, right? I mean, there's so many.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Kung Fu, you need Gong Li, you need power.
Well, that's the thing, right?
Yeah.
So in terms of Gong Li, in your experience, how often do you think someone should do the Jibin Gong type work for the Gong Li in the beginning?
Well, in my system, they don't train specifically for Gong Li until a number of years in.
Okay.
I want them to be functioning via Song completely.
Yep.
Completely.
Yeah.
Completely enough so that when they start increasing the pressure.
Yep. They're not reverting to the old mechanisms.
You got it. Because we're prone to revert to contraction to make power, instead of the opening and songing and stretching of the teachers and everything to make power. So you need to be that animal already, then you increase it, and then you build heaps more chi, heaps more jin, or Gong Li, internal Gong Li.
Yep.
But most people, when they do Gong Li, they're doing external Gong Li.
Yep.
and then trying to mix it with their supposed to be internal Tai Chi, and it's not going to work.
Yeah, it's interesting because this brings to the question of, like, say, resistance training, right? So in my experience, there's two distinct stages where resistance training is actually used, and the first is in the very beginning to build a strong substrate, and that's just external training.
Well, if you're weak, then, if a lot of people that come to me, I say, just go in the sun and do push-ups.
Yep.
Don't worry about meditation and subtlety. Like, you're deficient, you look like you don't eat food, do some push-ups.
Yep.
If you've done exercise or you've done kung fu or any martial art before or sport, and you already have a body, you don't need that first phase.
Right, exactly.
And then you need to learn how to function via sung and undo all that contraction. Maybe you'll get you'll lose muscle and stuff for a little while.
Yep.
Doesn't matter. And then later you introduce resistance of some kind. It could be a weight, it could be a long pole.
But they could operate it through sung at that point.
Right. So in my view, it's quite senior.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense, actually. It's really interesting how people don't look at the training process as a staged thing. It's like they have this idea that everything should work the same all the time.
No, the right thing at the right time.
Exactly right. And sometimes they're very contradictory. It's like something that you at one stage, you don't want to continue doing that beyond that stage.
I always say to my students, everything I tell you, I will contradict later.
Yep.
Everything, every single instruction. Don't get attached.
Yep.
Do the work and move on through the process.
That's right. So as one of my friends described it, it was like climbing a ladder, right? If you don't let the current run go, you can't get the next one.
You got it.
Yeah. Cool. So that's kind of all the questions I had, actually.
Cool.
And so anything else in terms of the plans for the next year? Are you going to be doing another camp in Phuket?
Well, I've got one coming up in February. It's pretty soon. And maybe I'll do something in Mexico in August.
Oh, cool.
And
that's the first time, right?
Yeah.
Mexico? Cool.
Or maybe I'm just going to go quiet for the year. I don't know.
Fair enough.
And I also have the Prague event.
Oh, that Prague European camp, the annual thing, right?
Yeah, which is May,
June.
It's in May, I think, this year.
Okay, cool.
But part of my mind's like, I'm just going to go quiet for a while. And then I've got some seniors, you got to come and teach here, so I don't know.
But I mean, at the moment, you're primarily working in a camp format where you get extended hands-on time with people, right?
Totally. Yeah. That's all
So Paul McIntyre is kind of doing the Asian circuit of workshops.
Yeah, he's doing workshops in Australasia.
Yep.
And Gabriel's doing Europe, and Curtis is doing the US.
Okay,
so that sort of covers the
entire globe, basically. So.
And then I'm just doing one or two sort of bigger events, and then
they have more hands-on, long-term stuff.
Yeah, 2 weeks to a month.
2 weeks to a month, yeah.
And then I'm doing my own thing, basically. Yeah. Focusing on my own practice.
Yeah, sounds great. And got a question for you about the camps. I know that you're very rigorous with these camps.
They're hard, if that's what you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're hard.
So
a lot of people have described it as the hardest thing they've ever done.
Right.
Many people. They're hard.
And do you find that people find it quite difficult to get through to the end of one?
I'm sure they do.
Right.
Yeah, they're trashed. It's physical.
Yeah.
It's work. It's hard work. People always like to give me a hard time saying they'd never do work, but they should try. It's work.
Well, this is the other thing, actually. I don't think many people appreciate or are willing to accept how much hard, painful work internal training is.
Well, I come from a really hard external style, and it's much worse than that. Much, much worse. Part of it is because you have to pay attention. You can't sort of disassociate in aggression or focus on the opponent. You're absorbed in with where all the pain is.
That's right.
Plus, it's just very painful.
Yeah.
You're tearing your body apart and putting it back together in a new way all the time.
It's but the thing is, it's very transformative, right?
That's I've been thinking about this, about no longer calling my art Tai Chi Chuan and just calling it Tai Chi Gong. Partly because I'm not that interested in Chuan.
The Chuan aspect of it.
I'm just not.
Yep.
It's something I did in the past.
Yep.
I teach it to people when they want it, but it's not where my heart is.
Yep.
And the transformation towards Gong, to Kung Fu, that's what it's about. It's all about the transformation, and it transforms your being physically, chi-wise, mentally, and ultimately spiritually.
Yep.
And that Gong, that transformation that you achieve, can be used for many different things.
Yeah.
So it's the transformational practice is really what I focus on.
Yep.
Not fighting skill or anything like
Yeah.
that. So it's just a more accurate term. I haven't made the move to do it, but
Yeah.
that's something that's on my mind.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think that will be an actually very apt name for what you do, because that is all about the transformative process, the actual transformative work.
That's it.
So, it's interesting because sometimes people ask me about your teachers, and this is my personal experience from you, is that I mean, some of these teachers I know myself, and some of these styles I know myself. I've experienced them, and but it's not what you express is your own.
Sure.
Like, I think it'll be unfair to say that so and so. I mean, there are your teachers, yes, but saying that you are doing so and so style,
Well, I'm not.
I think it's it'll be inappropriate to say that. So,
I mean, none of my teachers think I am or expect me to speak like that. Most of them have, at least in the last decade or so, have just taken me in and sort of shared with me, like, take this and do what you want. I mean, if I was doing their style, then I'd have many Kung Fu brothers doing the same thing.
Yeah, that's it.
I mean, like I said, I'm just teaching my art, take it or leave it. Like, I'm not claiming it's anything other than that.
yeah, I always admire the fact that you're not like resting on lineage laurels to justify what you're doing, rather than you're basically standing, letting it stand on its own merits, basically.
I really, that's one of the reasons why I, for many years, avoided even mentioning anything like that. I find it a little distasteful.
Yeah.
You have skill or you don't.
Well, that's the thing, right? Doesn't matter who you had lunch with or who you lived with. At the end of the day, can you do it?
As far as I can tell, there's no correlation at all.
And that's the thing. Like, when you look at some of the children of these masters who've learned from a very young age,
They have the best lineage, and often they don't have the Kung Fu.
that's right. So that's very true.
And then some people that didn't even spend long with someone, but they had the spirit and the soul for it, and they dove in and investigated, and
That's
they have
right.
great Kung Fu.
And even in the Yang tradition, there are people who came along, like Tian Shaolin was a classic example, right? And
I mean, incredible skill.
yeah,
Not of the family.
yeah, that's right. So
Almost of the family. Almost of the
it's interesting because it almost feels like being part of the family is a disadvantage.
Yeah, well, I think entitlement is a disadvantage.
Yeah.
And just because you share a surname,
Yep.
it doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
And, lineage doesn't mean anything. Real lineage is you have the skill.
That's right. I mean, that's the lineage, right? The transmission of skill.
And nobody has the Yang lineage. You can only have the lineage of your teacher,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So you can get the skill of your teacher, or you can have your own skill.
Yep.
But how can you know you've got the skill of some distant person in the past?
Exactly right.
You don't.
Exactly right. And all we have today is like romanticized stories to go by anyway.
Yes.
So
And they are.
who knows what their skills were at the time?
I mean, I think it's a mix between people having great chi skill and people being really not very good.
Yep.
Like most sport, if you look at the old stuff, it's bad.
Yeah, it is.
But then on the other side, in the more esoteric in terms of internal development, and maybe that was better. So
Yeah.
it's a bit like that.
So yeah, that
Unknown, right?
yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Some of the videos of fights we've seen,
Yeah.
it's dismal, it's sad.
Yeah,
Look at
it's
that,
actually,
like, ugh.
it's like, I know what you mean.
Yeah, it's bad. It's below par. Right?
Yeah. And then there's all the cultural elements, like, in I don't know if it is China-wide thing, but I know traditionally in China people don't like to hit the head.
Yeah, there's that.
Because, the whole loose phrase thing.
Yeah.
So, they're not really good at dealing with being hit on the.
It's probably why they don't move their head, and there's so many straight punches at the body.
That's right. So there's all these nuances that come into play, right? So, cool. Great. I won't keep you for too long. Cool. I know that you need to have dinner soon.
Yeah, that's good.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
And I'll see you soon.
Cheers. Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you.